So welcome to a new edition of our Expeditions in Experiential AI. Today I have the pleasure to introduce Cansu Canca, Cansu Canca. Hard to pronounce. I hope I learn well sometime. She will talk about puzzle solving in AI ethics, theories, principles, and tools. Cansu did her PhD in Singapore, and then had some time working in Harvard, and now she is part of Northeastern, although still in Turkey, and she's the ethics lead of our responsible AI practice. And I'm sure you will learn a little bit about that during her presentation. So, Cansu, thanks for doing this, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. So let me share my screen. Is it working? Everything's okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect, good. So I decided to, basically the talk that I'm gonna give today is less about a research paper and more about the practice part of AI ethics. And I thought this is a fitting talk since this is my first talk at the Institute, and also explain sort of the background rationality reasoning why we are going about with the responsible AI practice the way that we decided to go. The way that we decided to go. So let me start with this graph that I usually like to show to put things into perspective, basically to understand how the AI ethics conversation evolved and where did we start it and how far did we come. So we were not talking about AI ethics with this intensity just a short while ago. Of course, there's always conversation about the ethics of technologies, conversation as in like both public conversation as well as academic research and work that's being done in ethics of technology, ethics of engineering, information ethics, so machine ethics. There has been sort of like this different types of related discourse. But the AI ethics or ethics of AI, whichever way you want to do the search on Google Trends, was not really a concept that was being thrown around. So in 2017, the trend started to go upwards. And as it is with most of the ethics history, that was also due to scandals, and because 2017 is when the, especially the Facebook Cambridge Analytica conversation and eventually the scandal came up. So this is how the AI ethics trend went, and responsible AI is even more recent. No mention of this. We did not have a conversation. We did not have the concept of responsible AI. We were not talking about the concept of responsible AI for the longest time, and much more recently, as the practice of AI ethics became more and more relevant, I suppose we started to look for something that seems less vague than ethics, because ethics sounds vague and has a tendency, I am told as an ethicist, to scare people off. So that's where we are sort of starting. When we are talking and doing AI ethics or responsible AI, what is the path of practice that we should be pursuing? There is no clear one. That is sort of the blessing and the curse of being in a field that is developing recently. So of course, the fact that we cannot rely on established structures is the downside, but it also gives the opportunity to create systems, practice models that can serve us better than our previous ethics models as well. So if there is no clear path in practice, how did things started to sort of like come into the practice model in a way? How did we start integrating ethical discussion, ethical conversation into the actual innovation practice? So two approaches has been the most common. One is the research ethics model. I will go into those in detail in a minute. So here I'm just giving you the overview. So one is the research ethics model, and the other one is sort of this everyone all the time type of approach. research ethics model is the one that comes from specifically from the institutional review boards and the research ethics principles. Everyone all the time approach, as I call it, is when we have the AI ethics subject discussed by everyone all the time. Again, I will get into that in a little bit more. And I will argue, again, not an academic argument, but I will suggest that these two are certainly not good ways to go, but what is the best way to go? And I will suggest that the puzzle solving in ethics model that that we developed at AI Ethics Lab and I have been using in AI Ethics Lab is a model that allows ethics to take the space that it needs in order to do its work, but also allows proper collaboration with different expertise in different disciplines and experts in the field. And I will briefly mention also how we should think about AI ethics versus responsible AI. So when we talk about this collective AI ethics, responsible AI, we are looking at the whole AI life cycle. So starting from the conception of the research, conception of the idea, we have to think about the ethical questions that arise in every stage of the development, deployment, and even after launching of the tool, the system, the product, updating of the system, looking at the impacts of the system in the society. So the ethics work is not contained to a particular stage of innovation or particular stage of AI lifecycle. And similarly, it is not contained to a particular aspect of AI system. So here we are evaluating AI, in doing evaluations in AI ethics, we are engaging with the data, with the algorithms, models, with the actual product, the tool, the system that's being created, and also the human-computer interaction, how individuals use this and how the system impacts the society. Some examples, I basically chose the ones that are most well-known just to illustrate the scope of this as I put it up above. So the gaydar study from Stanford, where the facial recognition was supposed to determine the gay and straight people, distinguish the gay and straight people. Well, obviously here we start with the problem of the scientific validity, but also the purpose of the research, the ethics of the purpose of the research. Moving to the MIT study about the facial recognition technologies not working well on dark female faces, we had the question related to the bias in the data sets. The Science article on racial bias in healthcare decisions. This was a study that was looking at the prioritization of, an algorithm that helps to prioritize health needs of different populations, different individuals. And the problem there was that the healthcare spendings were used as a proxy, resulted in a bias against Black patients. So this time, not a data set bias, but rather than a problem that rather than integrating the existing societal bias into the system. And then two more. One is about the social media platforms. Social media platforms leading individuals to certain paths as they are searching for information, leading them to the paths that are more engaging for the users, meaning more beneficial for the platform because the users tend to stay on the platform for longer. So this was more of the design of the design of the tool as well as the purpose of the tool. And the human-computer interaction aspect, of course, how the users engage with this. And finally, these are, of course, not neatly divided into here's one problem, here's another problem. Usually they have multiple problems, then they have one. But illustrating some of the different aspects better with different cases, And finally, the Amazon's recruitment tool that shown bias against women, looking at the historical data. And there, looking at the historical data showing that the previous hires for high position tech jobs did not go to females. So the algorithm learning from that learned to discriminate against women. And here we have all sorts of problem with the data, with the algorithm, but we also had a problem of how should we think about hiring decisions and hiring algorithms in the background of knowing that hiring decisions themselves made by humans are extremely biased against certain populations, against certain individuals. So, so this is going more to the practice aspect of the question as well as the other ones. So the scope of the issue is very broad. And we can sort of summarize it in like 3 main clusters. So the content of the product, how can we make sure that we develop technologies that the embedded value judgment is the right value judgment? How can we make sure the processes of researching and developing these technologies in an ethical manner? So this goes closer to the research ethics in some sense. And the implementation, launching a product, deploying a product, also thinking about not just like individual users using products, but of course, professional use of AI systems. So meaning, for example, police organizations using AI systems or justice system using AI systems in their practice, and how and the impact of that. So in AI ethics, responsible AI, we have to cover all of these questions. We have to be engaging with all of these questions if we want the technologies, AI systems to be beneficial for the society. So the 2 models of practice that has evolved, as I said in the beginning, the first one is the research ethics model. So this model is the most well-known ethics practice model coming from the 70s. Basically, here, most academics are very well aware, we have the institutional review boards. And here I'm really talking about the human subject protection research ethics model, because that is the one that is most used as a model for ethics practice. So the idea is that we have a board that is responsible for making ethical decisions about the research before the research starts. And they base their decisions on a set of principles. This was a model that was put forth in the late 70s after a number of medical ethics scandals on human experimentation scandals, basically. And this was very well, I mean, the idea that board and principles really caught the attention of the AI world. So remember that I showed you that in 2017, the AI ethics, the interest in AI ethics went upwards. So we can see that trend here as well. What we did at AI Ethics Lab was to look at all the published AI ethics principles and put them in a toolkit where we can interactive structure where we can sort of sort them in different ways. So here you have them on the map. You can see the number of documents that are published, where they are published, what kind of organizations publish those documents, and the chronological part of it. There's further other aspects of the toolkit as well, but that's not relevant right now. So in 2015, we had just 4 documents talking about AI ethics principles. In 2021, there were over 100 sets of AI ethics principles published around the world. So this is to show that, and many of these organizations, companies that publish their AI ethics principles also established some sort of AI ethics board. That can be a review board, can be a oversight board, or just an advisory board. So why is this not a great idea? Well, basically, this was already this model is already challenging within research ethics. The reason is that the ethical discussion, the ethical evaluation here is really contained in the board. So the board decides about the ethics of the research, and that's really it. There is no more, it sort of takes away the responsibility and the ongoing engagement with ethics from the researchers. The board approval started to mean that the ethics is taken care of. And the problem with the board is that, well, the board is putting a board and expecting them to be engaging with all sorts of different research and being able to analyze their ethical aspects is not a simple task. And instead of that, the research ethics model actually puts together just a bunch of different experts. There is actually no requirement for IRBs to have an ethics expert at the board. So they should have some subject matter experts and some lay people, but they don't actually have to have any ethics experts. And this board relies completely on the principles that were put forward in the 70s and afterwards elaborated in the research ethics literature. And the board is authoritative, distant. So if they don't approve the research does not proceed, which is, in a sense, if they make good decisions, it's a good thing. On the other hand, there is very little room for appeal. And the pre-approval structure of the board also creates a bottleneck for the research, because everything has to first go through this process. Now, whether or not this works for research ethics is a different question. Imagine this for the whole of AI lifecycle. It just basically doesn't, it's extremely ill-equipped and inefficient to broaden this and expect a board to be able to not just do a research review, but engage with the questions, ethical questions that will arise in the development, during the design phase, during the deployment phase, and the ongoing loop of updating and researching of the tool. So again, regardless of whether or not we can see, we think that this research ethics model functions within research ethics, it's definitely not suitable for the breadth of AI ethics work that needs to be done. So if it's not that, then what? The other, more or less, I think around the same time, one could say that the ethics, the research ethics model was sort of a reaction to this, the public scandals, the public demand to see something being done about the ethics of technology. Again, which is like history repeating itself. Research ethics boards came into being with the same storyline as well. The other approach, the everyone all the time approach, is more about this pressure to engage everyone working on AI, having to engage with the ethical sides of the AI question. The issue with this one is that there are multiple questions that goes into the AI ethics, responsible AI evaluation. So what is the impact of the AI system on the society, on individual behavior, on institutions? What is the right thing to do? What is the fair system to deploy? Or how can we develop, technically speaking, how can we develop fair systems, explainable systems? How can we design the user interface such that individuals can engage with them in a rational manner? And what are the best policy, both organizational and regulatory policy for developing and deploying AI systems? All of these fall under the AI ethics, responsible AI questions. And what we have been doing, I think, in the field is every expert who is working on AI is trying to answer all of these questions. The problem with this is that, well, these problems are really distinct from each other. So they require different types of methodologies to answer. It is not reasonable for example, for philosophers to be able to go and do impact assessment as the social scientists are doing, or it is not reasonable for the computer scientists to try to define fairness before they engage with developing fair models. So when we are merging all of these questions on top of each other, the method, the knowledge that needs to be there in order to engage with these questions, all of them sort of gets mixed up. And the value judgments often get obscured, meaning that from a descriptive work about AI's impact on society, we end up jumping into a moral conclusion, which is not necessarily obvious. And the misinformation sounds like something else which is not what I want to say, but more like the lack of information, lack of background information about ethics is making a lot of the progress slower. Meaning, for example, instead of talking about, this is, I think, quite relevant in the case of, for example, talking about fair algorithms or fair models, instead of talking about what kind of a fairness definition we are aiming at, papers seem to be going against each other, saying, well, the model is not fair because just employing a different fairness definition to explain why. So this is also obviously extremely inefficient. We are not doing what industrialism has taught us, which is the division of labor. Instead, all of us are trying to be experts in everything AI ethics related. So how does the puzzle solving and ethics model fit into this background storyline narrative that has been developing over the last 5 years? Well, the idea of the puzzle solving and ethics model is to create something that is integrated into the organization, that is continuously engaging with the ethics evaluation throughout the AI's lifecycle, collaborated with experts, allowing ethics experts collaborate with other experts, a structure that allows a dynamic and responsive ethics evaluation. So not waiting for a board, not knowing what the board is trying to solve, but rather looking at the progress of the product, for example, and engaging with the ethical issues as they arise, and hoping to go for a multidisciplinary structure where each expertise is really making use of their in-depth knowledge, rather than sort of creating an interdisciplinary limbo where all of the experts are dumbing down their work to engage in interdisciplinary discourse. So now, let me see how much time I have. Okay, so now I will go into the details of the puzzle solving and ethics model. And as I do that, I will open a number of parentheses to explain how this model is aiming to do more than the research ethics or the everyone all the time type of approach. So the AI ethics analysis is a good place to start the journey, so to speak. Because oftentimes ethics becomes relevant. Oftentimes the ethical question becomes pressing right before for the companies, right before they launch a product. So that is usually how my experience has been engaging with companies, for example, most of the time. And there the real the topic is there anything that is, what is the ethical status of the product that we are about to release to the world? The ethics analysis does not have to happen at that stage. preferably, ethics analysis should be from the very beginning of the project, from the conception of the idea. As I said, there is ethical questions regarding, should you be doing this research? Is this a good idea? Going all the way to the finalizing of the product. What we do with the ethics analysis is first of all, to understand the ethical landscape that we are operating on, meaning understanding the domain that this technology will be released in and the technology itself. So think about it, for example, facial recognition in law enforcement. So the one thing to understand, what are the existing ethical issues, ethical concerns within law enforcement? And the other question is, what are the existing ethical concerns related to facial recognition? And then bringing them together, what are this particular product's ethical risks and opportunities? So here, when I say ethics risks, I'm talking about what this product can introduce as a risk to the world, like ethical issue. And the opportunity is more like, what can it solve? Is there any existing ethical problem that this AI system can actually help mitigate or eliminate? And finally, we cannot see the last part of my slides, but finally, we do ethics by design and troubleshooting, which basically is the idea that we are not just there to tell the developers or designers what is wrong with the product, but oftentimes there are ways of working together to help them fix the problems before they finalize the product, before they deploy the product. And for that, we have to work. What I forgot to say is that for ethical landscape analysis, we have to be informed from, for example, social sciences work. And in order to do the collaborative, the troubleshooting ethics by design, we have to work together with the technical experts in the field. So just to give you an example, some of the work I did at AI Ethics Lab was, so this is not just one project, this is a few different projects, few different clients, but similar topics. So they were all about using cameras for safety. One was for the workplace safety, the other one was home safety, and different types of products about trying to address the question of, how can we make sure that we can increase the security at home or increase the worker safety at the warehouses. So in this case, as I said, going back to the analysis details, what we did first was to understand the workspace safety issues that are already there. What are the ethical problems that are in the manual world? And then understand the type of technology that can either help solve or introduce new problems. And as one would expect, with a number of different cases to analyze, some of them turned out to have very good ethical justification and standing, and some of them had to delay their launch and rework their what is the value that the system is supposed to add versus what are the risks that the system is introducing to the customers, to the users. And in both cases, in all of these cases, we worked with the technical experts to help them navigate some of the issues that we pointed out. So the analysis part is should not be understood as a one-off right before launch panic type of occurrence. As I said, if we are trying to do AI ethics efficiently, we have to have processes, we have to have a structure in place that allows the analysis to have a defined timeline, a defined position in the workflow, and an already existing system where we are doing this from the beginning until the end of the the AI lifecycle. So what we do with the strategy aspect is really to put together, again, looking at the organization as a structure that will eventually have to redo AI ethics, redo all of these components for every project, for every deployment of AI systems, putting in place systems to make this as seamless, as streamlined as possible. So the process part is really looking at, for each team's workflow, how can we put the ethics component in a way that is least demanding from them and most rewarding for the ethical evaluation work to happen on time. So this will change completely from an innovation team to a team that is responsible for example, procuring AI systems or deploying AI systems. A big part of the workflow is also making sure that we have a structure to record the decisions, AI ethics decisions that has been taken in the course of either development of an AI system or procurement or deployment of an AI system, so that we start understanding what is whether or not the decision-making process is working, first of all, but more than that, what kind of value judgments are being made? What are the underlying values that this company or these individuals are expressing as they make ethical decisions in developing or deploying or procuring AI systems, and preferably put them in a consistent, coherent structure. To do that, to do this consistent, coherent structure, what we also need is a playbook, meaning every material that the company might need, that individuals might need, so that they get sufficient guidance to deal with the ethical questions that are not very complex, and still some sort of guidance to deal with the complex ethical questions. So here, we are back to the principles that I shown in the research ethics model. Principles do come handy if they are used correctly, which I will get to it in a moment. But in addition to principles, use cases serve to illustrate how the organization is meant to think about the different values that they are engaging with. Are they generally prioritizing, for example, user decision making, so the autonomy of the user, or user well-being? So questions that use cases that show not only how principles apply, but also how the company is meant to go forward when there is a sort of like a clear ethical dilemma and you have to make a choice. And putting these into structures like tools where different types of individuals within the company can engage with these the playbook, again, which I will get to in a minute. But before that, I want to focus on the principles, because I think the principles section is both. One reason to focus on it is because it is such a big part of the AI ethics discussion and AI ethics practice. And the other reason is because a lot of the times they are just useless. So we have to understand what goes wrong, what makes them not so guiding, and how can we really make best use of them. So remember where we are in this pie model, and now we are going to go and take a little bit of a deep dive on the principles part. So again, the principles, we are thinking of this as a part of the playbook, as a part of the guiding material of companies. And as I've shown you, almost all companies now have some sort of AI ethics principles published. The problem is that they are not operational, they are not guiding. So here's an example. I did not put the company name because there's no need for that, but here's a summary of one company's AI ethics principles. So they say that their AI systems will be fair, They will be transparent and explainable. They will be human-centric. The systems will be private and secure by design, and they will be working, I'm assuming not the systems, they will be working with partners and third parties. This is the summary. It should be very clear that the concepts on this summary are all over the place. Fairness is a very loaded, normatively very loaded idea. Transparency and explainability being much more straightforward. Human-centric is absolutely unclear, because human-centric in which sense? What is the human quality we are putting in the center? Is it the human well-being? Is it the human rational decision-making? Both of which, as you know, moral philosophy shows, depending on which value you prioritize, you are going to have different actions shown as the right action. Privacy and security by design, interesting also because it's emphasizing by design. And finally, working with partners and third parties is not a principle in the same manner that the others are. This is more like how do we go about this? So if you are trying to make a decision about what kind of a value judgment what is the value judgment we have to put in place, either into the as we are developing the AI system or we are deploying the AI system, this summary does not, this set of AI principles does not help. More narrowly, we can just look at the privacy and fairness as how these concepts are so different from each other that they should not be in the list together. So when we look at this 100 sets of AI principles, over 100 sets of AI principles published, in our list, fairness and privacy is mentioned more or less at the same rate. So they are usually put on the same document, on the same level, saying, you know, the AI system should be fair and it should be private. The problem is that conceptually, fairness and privacy, sorry, not the transparency, but that too, they are not on the same level at all. So think about it from two ways. The goal of fairness is itself. So when we say something should be fair, there is no further argument that we have to give in order to explain why it should be fair. The question is much more like about the definition. What do we mean by fair? Different theories of justice will say different types of allocation of resources is fair. So, I mean, obviously, by the way, just to put this also into context, the question of fairness is not obviously a new question. We have been dealing with this in practice in bioethics for many, many years. The distribution of goods one argument would be, for example, for the utilitarian way of thinking, whatever creates the most benefits in the society is the fair distribution. The other, the theory of fairness, theory of justice would suggest equal opportunity is the fair distribution. And another theory would argue that the equal outcome is the fair distribution. So saying something is fair or not fair is like saying something is ethical or not ethical. It's not very guiding. Yes, we understand the final purpose, but we have to be much more explicit about what we are dealing with. In comparison, privacy is quite straightforward in the sense that privacy, first of all, is just an instrument. We don't value privacy for the sake of privacy, but instead the privacy serves another function. It helps us protect, promote our autonomy, our individual decision-making capacity, and it might reduce harm, prevent us from being in the harm's way. And the definitions of privacy is also showing this in the sense that there are different definitions, but they are really about emphasizing different aspects of privacy rather than contradicting with each other. And why does this matter? Why did I make such a long conversation about this one problem in the summary in principles, in the summary of principles in the principles lists? Well, because if we don't know what the guideline is trying to say by saying be fair, it's not going to be guiding. It will require a deep dive into political philosophy every time we want to employ it. And it is also very, as I said, it is also very clear from the computer science literature that many papers start with saying that we have shown that this algorithm that uses this fairness metric is unfair because it does not protect the vulnerable, for example, which is not a very interesting argument if the fairness metric is that they are using initially is not meant to protect the vulnerable, but let's say it's only is only meant to do equal opportunity, provide equal opportunity. So we are getting into problems that can be solved, well, not solved, but that can be more efficiently tackled if we divide the work and if we create concepts, if we deal with concepts that are clear, which is sort of philosophy's work, and then take those concepts and use them in guiding our decisions in developing or deploying AI systems, either from the technical perspective or from the deployment perspective. Now, because of this problem, we did one of the things that we created was basically a structure of all of these principles and putting them in a system where you can see which principle is supporting what value, what underlying value. So here you can see that privacy or transparency are next to the autonomy because that's the value that they are primarily supporting. And justice, which you can also, in this case, you can also say fairness, is not on the list on the right, but on the left as one of the core values. And why is this important? Because it is not an ethical violation. It's not a necessary ethical violation if privacy is violated. There are ways that the autonomy, individual autonomy, can still be protected. For example, if an individual is giving consent for their private information to be used, well, there is no autonomy issue that we have there. There is no ethical violation that we are worried about. Whereas if we are violating an individual's autonomy, that is necessarily an ethical problem. So this is the version 1. And I also published an article on this explaining this distinction between core and instrumental principles. There's a version 2 that I have been working on. Basically, the version 1 is using the existing principlism framework. Version 2 is, I suppose, as expected from a philosopher, is challenging the existing principlism framework and asking, well, can we have a better structure for thinking about this? Now, if you remember, we were on the PI model and we were talking about the playbook. And this serves like as a very long explanation why playbook, which includes principles which many companies have, should be clearly defined, and ethics, the ethical work, the philosophical work is required for them to be operational. How am I doing with the time? Okay, so, and the last bit of the strategy is the people. Everything that I just explained, well, who is going to do all of those things? Who's going to do who's going to use the principles? Who is going to use the, who's going to be engaging with the workflow and so on? An organization that has to engage with AI ethics has to have people who are skilled in ethics, in AI ethics. And that is not just the ethics team. We can think about, well, an ethics team, we can think about an ethics team as experts who work on AI ethics or responsible AI. But there is an upper and a lower level that is often needed. One is the ethics strategy board or chief ethics officer. Basically, the idea here is that those value judgments that define the company's ethical character is a leadership question. So that should be handled in a sort of like a policy level. And below in terms of expertise, below the ethics team, not in terms of expertise, in terms of the type of ethics work that they engage with, the ethics network is the idea of an ethics network is to have individuals who are skilled in dealing with ethical questions, even if they are not experts, meaning, for example, knowing how to use the playbook, knowing when to engage with the process, the workflow, where you need to do ethics checks, for example, and understanding when a question is complex enough that they need to escalate it to the ethics team and maybe even escalate it to the ethics strategy board. So basically treating ethics, anyone who has practiced ethics, I think, knows that a lot of the time ethical problems, ethical issues are not dilemmas. They come about because people did not think about that aspect. So putting in place a playbook, a process, and people who are skilled in using these playbooks helps us catch those sort of like mundane ethical issues before they become a major problem, eliminate the neglect on this, and still have room to deal with the complex ethical questions and have enough human resource at the ethics team to deal with those actually complex ethical questions and not with everyday ones, remember this type of ethical issues. And finally, how do we have all of these different ethics people skilled? Well, and that requires different types of ethical training for the task that the person is designated with for their role. So executive education in ethics is something that should go for that is necessary for the leadership level when they have to engage with these policy related questions. Workshops, sprints for developers, for designers, for people who are developing the technology, but also for people who are deploying the technology. So think about law enforcement officers who are using different AI systems in their work. Engaging with them so that they understand the ethical, how to ask the relevant ethical questions to understand what are the shortcomings, what are the weak spots of the systems that they are using, and not to over-rely on them, and also not to completely neglect them, not making sure that they make use of the system at the right level. So all of these are obviously what we have to do as in the training. And when we engage with companies, the question that we first ask is, well, okay, which one do we have to start with? Should we start with the strategy, with the analysis, or with the training? That depends on the company's organization's pressing needs. Why is this whole model, the PI model, is better, in my very strong opinion, than the research ethics model or the all hands, everyone at the same time approach? Well, because unlike the research ethics model, it actually intentionally tries to integrate in the analysis part, it intentionally leaves room for working on problem solving with the technical experts, or learning from the social science experts about the impact of the issue that they are trying to solve, for example. And then the whole strategy and training is not geared towards an ethics board, or not geared towards individuals to be able to convince the ethics board, but rather really engaging with these different moving parts of the ethical decision making. So this is the system that we developed at AI Ethics Lab. So that's why I was using the, I was talking about it from the perspective of ethics specifically, most specifically. But there is, very briefly, just in a couple minutes, let me just say, what is the difference, seeming difference between AI ethics and responsible AI? As I mentioned, it seems like we are asking all of these questions at the same time right now about the impact of AI, the benefit of AI, the harm of AI systems. But really, answering these questions require separating them into their academic homes, so to speak, and to use those disciplines, body of knowledge, methodologies, and collaborate. At the heart of it, because the question is about values, at the heart of it is the philosophical philosophy, where the normative question really is tackled with. I would say this whole collaboration of different disciplines in order to create AI systems that have good impact on the society, on individuals, is what we mean by responsible AI. Whereas AI ethics is really snuggles in the philosophy and actually goes beyond this question about, how can we develop AI systems, but also goes into different questions related to AI. For example, the questions related to AI as a moral agent, or what is the AI system's moral standing and how we should treat them. So understanding this collaborative aspect of responsible AI, coming now to Northeastern. So what we did is we put the puzzle solving and ethics model at the core of our responsible AI, and then started to add these different components which bring together these different types of work that needs to be done in order to take ethics from just the questioning aspect, but actually make it impactful, make it contributing, collaboratively contributing to the development or the deployment process of AI systems. That's it.
Thank you, Cansu. Very interesting talk. Finally, I understand your model completely. I hope. Yeah. So, any questions? Please raise your hand, or I don't know if anyone typed the question here. Joe, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, while we wait for others to come in. Great talk, Cansu. Thank you. My question is, I'll just read what I shared in the chat. To have real teeth, ethics principles must have the capacity to say no outright in some cases. So how and when can AI ethics be applied to stop a project from advancing outright? Is that something AI ethics can do?
So I would say, first of all, I would say that, oh man, I would say so many things about this. So one thing is that I think we should not rely on AI, we should not rely on ethics principles too much. So when people ask questions like how can we have AI ethics principles stopping us? Well, look, if in a way, they can, if it is something obviously wrong, the ethics principles will be sort of sufficient. Like if let me see the question one more time. How and when yeah. So if, for example, a project is basically violating all of the core values, like if it is both manipulating the individuals, not benefiting them, potentially harming them, and creating fairness problems, I mean, you don't have much to think through. The problem happens when you have a project that is, let's say, manipulating individuals, or at least not like manipulating or forcing individuals, but for their well-being, or for reducing, preventing harm. Now you have a bigger issue to deal with because there's a real dilemma at hand. I would say that AI ethics can certainly say no, and to many things if it is wrong. I think it is not so difficult to identify what is wrong. The harder question is that, is there only one right answer, or is there a set of right answers that you have to choose from?
So Albert has a question.
Thank you. And unfortunately, my camera is not working, but hi, Cansu. It was a great talk. Thank you. I was thinking of, I'm working a little bit on incorporating these ethical principles into the education in our computer science department, because, as you say, that if you're going to adopt an approach in which all the different phases of the process is going to be continuously monitored, obviously the people who are building the technologies must be doing this, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. It's going to be impossible. So Harvard University had this approach called embedded ethics, where they kind of try to embed into multiple courses examples and in a distributed fashion, in a sense. It's probably very difficult to coordinate and implement this, but do you have any insights about what would be the best approach to incorporate this into the education system itself, like in an undergraduate education?
Yeah, so hi, Albert, by the way. I think, so first of all, there are people who are better situated to answer these questions. Precisely, for example, the embedded ethics people at Harvard, I have talked to them about this, and they seem to be managing the coordination quite well, by the way, but also our Ethics Institute who are working on creating these curriculum as well. What I think is important is like, so I will just give the pointers that I realize are important. One is in creating training programs, not really the undergraduate program, but one thing is to make sure that the ethics is not like an add-on. So if it comes at the end of the course, I think it is understood as it is the last thing to think about. Instead, I think what embedded ethics is trying to do as well is to bring ethical issues quite in-depth, in an in-depth way periodically, so that it's sort of like woven into the discussion of a data science course, for example. The other thing that I found extremely useful in dealing with trainings is that to create to sort of turn the ethical question in such a way that you sort of make the student go through the reasoning process, but as they are doing this, also using their own skills. So like showing that responsible AI interaction. So helping them, forcing them to use their, let's say, data science training or computer science training in trying to figure out the solution together with the ethics part. Because if they do that, their ethics becomes something that is in the same problem solving mechanism in their head, rather than here are some rules and here's how you go and solve the problem as a scientist. And I had one more thing that I wanted to say about this. Oh, and the last thing is that I think a lot of the times, again, in practice, what is really important is like, can they identify different values? And can a developer or a designer really identify what are the value judgments that are in play at their work? So rather than necessarily turning them into ethics experts to solve difficult questions, it's really about can you sort of articulate the ethical push and pull in the project that you are dealing with and why you are making a decision that you are making. That goes unbelievably long way, in my experience.
So there are two more questions in the chat. So I will read the first one from Angel. Is there a way to incentivize ethics, for example, attach monetary value to building ethical applications, whether using blockchain or any other means? Would such an approach ever work?
I guess it depends on what you want to do. Like, what do you mean by incentivizing ethics? I think ethical behavior, ethical action, or making sure that making sure that an action is ethically preferable, or the ethical value judgment, like the ethical reasoning is taking into account while making a decision. We can incentivize that. And yes, monetary incentives would work, or reputational incentives would also work. If you know that you will be exposed for doing something unethical, I think that also works. I think, unfortunately, ethics usually does work with some sort of outside incentive. If we are talking about actually like ethical action as like morally speaking, I think many philosophers will argue, and many theories would argue, well, there has to be some of the ethical intention in there. So probably just being incentivized by money is not exactly the ethical agent that we are hoping for. But nevertheless, for the purposes of creating AI systems that are beneficial, yes, and of course it has to be, because if the organizational structure that we live in is always incentivizing speed or incentivizing shortcuts, then it is asking individuals, developers, designers, it is asking them sort of to go beyond what is allowed and taking sort of like going for like a superhero system where they have to take the ethics into account despite all the costs.
Yeah, so we will stay a bit longer because we have now many questions in the chat. So Candice asked if, well, I don't think it will be too ethical offer to money. At least in my moral values will be strange. That's like messing with ethics. But Candice asked if, or maybe let's do Rama Chandra question that is related to this question is that he says that he may sound pessimistic. Is the only way to get the ethical work predicated in regulation forcing it? Or just like we need EEE?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, okay. So I think both questions
Equal
are
opportunity regulations. He means.
Yeah. So I think both questions are on point in the sense that we know that ethics requires some sort of incentives. Also, think about research ethics. I mean, the reason that research ethics has teeth is because it's in the regulation. Like if you don't get the research ethics, I mean, in academia, for example, if you don't get the ethics approval and go ahead, there are consequences. So we know both like as like individual beings and organizations, ethics has to have some sort of, unfortunately, has to have some sort of incentive around it. Policy regulation definitely works for that purpose, as well as different types of incentives that Angel mentioned as well, with the monetary incentives. But with the regulation, I think the thing to be very careful about is like, how detailed do you want to get, and getting the ethics right, basically.
Okay. Candice asked, is there consideration in this community for a formal oversight committee in AI as instituted in other realms of ethical questions in experimentation, like AI CUC with use of animal models? Maybe you should mention also our ethics board, because it was very quick and we were launching that ethics board very soon.
Oh, you mean our ethics board?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, so the idea that what we are doing with the Institute's responsible AI services, we added an AI ethics advisory board that is made from experts in the field for the brought together for the type of questions that the company or the organization has. So let's say if it is a company that's dealing with healthcare, then we make sure that there is an expert in health as well as always an expert in ethics, unlike the IRBs, because if you are dealing with ethics, you have to have an expert in ethics, obviously, and of course an expert in AI in all cases. So in addition to that, subject matter experts. So there is, so this is not an oversight committee. So this is an advisory board, and the oversight committee is tricky in the sense that at which points do we want to have the oversight committee engage with the AI ethics? I am extremely, so I have a paper on this that's still in the manuscript position state, so I haven't published it yet, but I would argue that IRBs are not doing the function that they claim that they are doing. IRBs, if we don't have IRBs, there are the regulation, IRBs are just basically following the regulation, so knowing that there are those regulations is sort of sufficient. And then what we should have instead of the IRBs is the researchers taking sort of this, knowing that the ethics justification lies with them. It is very difficult to say that IRBs have added value to has added value for ethics for things to go ethical, let's say. And one can also argue that they have had quite significant harm for research. So why do we want to, we need an argument to put in place oversight boards that are expensive, that slow down the system, that slow down innovation, and keeping in mind that innovation also means that innovation that can benefit individuals. So we are not just like trying to keep things super slow. And if we can have structures that engage with ethics without creating this bottleneck. And again, keeping in mind that IRBs actually don't even have ethics experts on board. So the only reason, again, why IRBs or ICOGs work is because they are, as Candice just mentioned there as well, they are federally mandated. So if you have a policy around a system, yes, that's a good incentive around it. But I wouldn't say that that justifies putting in oversight boards, which is a different talk, which I'm happy to give later.
So Olivia asked, in the playbook, are there any technical tools you recommend to mitigate ethics issues?
So yes and no, in the sense that in the playbook that the puzzle solving in ethics model, the PI model that I have from the AI ethics lab, no, because I was purely focusing on the ethical questions, ethical tools to create. But with the taking it to the responsible AI and opening it up more to the collaborations. So Ricardo being here, I'm gonna say yes, Ricardo, right? We have technical tools for playbook. Yes.
Yes. So I think we skip Ming-Ji's question. Sorry. Are there cultural differences in AI ethics? This could be a very long answer. So, and we may disagree there here, but let's make it short because.
Okay. Again, very short answer, and yes, this is a whole another talk. So there is definitely differences among cultures in how they weigh different values. So the value of privacy or the value of the agency, those may differ significantly from culture to culture, especially when they conflict with another one. So like the social well-being versus individual freedom is gonna be weighed differently in different countries. What I would say does not differ is the core values. So in all philosophical traditions that I am familiar with, being Turkish, having studied in Asia, worked in the US and in Europe, all the philosophical literature that I am familiar with and my practice, autonomy, prevention of suffering, and some form of fairness is always there. So I don't think we have disagreement at the core level, but this still leaves a lot of work, like social science work, to be done to understand what, okay, there is no difference in the core level, but when we are going to make a decision, yes, how should we value different instruments, different values in different cultures? So yeah.
Yeah, I think the trade-offs will depend on every culture because the values will be different. So a last question, I have a question because at the beginning I thought you would say something, but I think there's some people in the audience that will be interested in knowing your answer. That I already know the answer, but I think it's good for the audience. Is okay. What's wrong with talk about ethical AI or trustworthy AI?
Yeah, I actually had that slide and I removed it because
I'm biasing the question.
Yes. So the problem we're talking about, let's start with the trustworthy AI. I think the problem with the trustworthy AI is the idea of trust is focusing on the reaction of the person. So I can trust things that are not good. I can trust things that are manipulative. There are many ways that makes me trust a system. Being trustworthy obviously means that it actually is not manipulative. It's not bad, but it is sort of moving towards, well, quickly to the receiver's end. What makes a system trustworthy? And I don't think this is what we want to focus on. With ethical AI, what I mentioned earlier, like this thing about, well, when we say ethical AI, it sounds like we are talking about an agent that is capable of moral behavior, that is capable of ethical behavior. And that is certainly not the case in the existing AI systems, at least. And our main area of work right now is these not that smart artificial intelligence systems. So we cannot really saying ethical AI is sort of giving the illusion of something bigger than what we have today. Responsible AI is not the perfect phrase either, but I think it avoids these two quite glaring issues and sort of, I hope people don't think, and we usually say responsible AI practice and not just responsible AI, to sort of show that like we are not talking about AI being responsible here, we are talking about the practice being responsible.
Yeah, and we don't put the problem on the receiver, but on the doer. So that's
Yes.
important.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm sorry that we cannot take more questions, Angel. Sorry, it's too long. We have already 11 minutes past, and great talk, Cansu. Thank you. And we invite all the people attending to our next seminar. That will be a distinguished seminar on information retrieval using neural AR, and then we'll have another expedition as we usually have 2 seminars per month. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you very much.